Hi, HR Nation. Welcome back to another episode of the HR Leaders Podcast, the show where we explore the future of work with industry experts and HR executives on the world's leading global brands. Today, we have a super interesting guest. So excited for this one. We're joined by Morra Aarons Mele, who's an entrepreneur, public speaker, and host of the Anxious Achiever podcast. Welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm super good, Chris. How are you?
Not too bad. Not too bad. It's so strange when I watch someone's TED talk and then like a week later I'm speaking to them. So thank you so much. I really enjoyed the TED talk first and foremost. I love the work you're doing. It has a certain place in my heart as well, all of the work you're doing. So tell everyone a bit more about yourself and your journey to where we are now.
Well, I think like many of us, I have had clinical anxiety and depression since I was 19 when I was diagnosed, and I'm turning 45 very soon. So it's been a minute that I've had a lot of mental health struggles of my own, but I'm also a super ambitious person. I love to work. I always wanted to have a big career. And, for a long time, I really struggled trying to make the two pieces of that life match up. How do you grow in your career? How do you travel? How do you network? How do you manage people? When a lot of time, for me at least, I was crying in the bathroom because I was super anxious. I was depressed. It was very difficult for me. And so I decided, I was a blogger for many years and I was a writer, and I just decided to study and learn from people who were way more successful than me and who lived with anxiety, who traveled with it every day. It's something that we know a lot of our colleagues have, but we're really loath to talk about it. And I always felt like it was something that celebrities could talk about, rock stars and, famous people could talk about, but like the people that I would work with and admire, I wanted to hear their story.
It's interesting you mentioned like celebrities and athletes and stuff like that, because when they say they have a psychologist, to help them with to be on the A game, it's fine, right? In the sports context, or a celebrity, but you bring it into the business concept, all of a sudden it's seen as a weakness. So strange.
Well, I think sports too, right? So There's a few real innovators. There's been some NBA players. I had Kevin Love on my podcast, who's a 3-time NBA champ, Olympic gold medalist. He talks about his anxiety and depression. The problem is, as long as we live in a world where leadership is about this sort of outdated notion of being strong, whatever that means, and we see dealing with emotions as softer and weak, there's always going to be a stigma there. And that's why I'm so excited for the work that you're doing and a lot of really other brave leaders are doing.
Yeah. Well, is that one of the reasons why I didn't share how I was feeling for so long, is that when I would look up in the organization at my manager, the director, the CEO, they never showed any sign of weakness, shared anything personal. It was all, suck it up, and I was scared. I was like, I can't say this. I can't say I need to take some time off because I'm not feeling.
And you're a white guy, right? So you have to fit into an extra sort of stereotype of strength.
It's true. Yeah. I didn't even think about that as well. I want to stop for a second and talk about you. You talk about yourself and identify as an anxious overachiever. How do you describe that?
I think it's pretty clear, right? I mean, I have a lot of anxieties. When you have an anxiety disorder, it can manifest in a lot of different ways. Some people have specific phobias, flying. They are scared of certain things, right? Some people have social anxiety, which is very, very common. Actually, it's the most common kind of anxiety disorder, I think, up with generalized anxiety disorder. And, we know what that is, right? You're fearful of meeting other people and what they're going to think of you. People can have panic anxiety. It manifests in many different ways. I kind of have a lot of different anxieties, and it travels with me every day, which, as you know, as someone who used to live on planes and have to meet a lot of people and really be out there, it can be really challenging, because when you're driven to make your career public and big, and yet you're also managing with your inner dialogue every day, it's a real struggle.
Yeah. People always say to me, because Shane, who's my co-founder, he hosts our in-person events. Mm-hmm. And people always say, why don't you host the events? I don't think they realize I'm terrified. Really? So they see me on the podcast every day and they're like, oh, Chris is speaking to people. But when it comes to speaking in public on the stage, I've still to this day really struggle with that. And I don't really talk about that, but so Shane would, whenever we do our events, he would do the events and I'll do the digital stuff. I don't know what it is about doing it in a digital environment. I don't feel the same pressure. So even our virtual summits, there's, tens of thousands of people watching our virtual summit, but because I can't see them and there's a camera in the room, I'm fine. It's so
that's really interesting. Is it that you feel less judged?
I don't know. I like looking at this camera, like it, even though I know there's thousands of people behind it, it doesn't have the same effect. Whereas if I'm on stage and then physically in that room, it's terrifying. And then, but on the other end, which is maybe even more strange, when I used to dance and perform, I would relish that. Going out on stage and dancing. Because I said to you earlier, as a joke before the show, you can't be stressed out on breakdance.
Well, your serotonin must be through the roof.
Yeah. You haven't even got time to think about it, right? You're concentrating on landing that flip or, making sure that you stay balanced. You haven't got time to feel stressed out or anxious during that moment.
Can I ask you a question then? Because when you said that, you just made me think of Simone Biles, of course, the Olympic gymnast. And one of the things that she said, she had to pull out of the Olympics because she was having mental health issues. She didn't specify, but that landing in one piece safely would not be safe for her because she couldn't place her body in the air because of her mental state. And I'm curious if that resonates for you. Yeah,
of course, because if I felt that way, I would never attempt to do some of the things that I would do because it would be, you'd very badly hurt yourself.
Yeah.
You have to be fully engaged in every single way to be doing some of those tricks or moves or flips to be able to do that. There's no room for error. Or exactly. The worst thing you can do is actually is pull out or hesitation is probably the worst thing. Because if you go into a flip and you hesitate because you're thinking about something else, that's so dangerous. You have to be fully all in or not at all.
That's what they called it, the twisties, right? When you lose the sense of your body in air.
Yeah, it's and everyone's been there, and then you end up pulling out, and you have no control of your landing, and it's just it's bad. It's same with skating. I used to skateboard, and if you were going to jump down a set of 10 steps on a skateboard, you cannot hesitate. You either go in or you either do it or you don't. Because if you mid-air decide no and the board leaves your feet, you're just you're breaking ankles. You're hurting yourself. So it's one of those things where you'd roll up 3 or 4 times, more than that sometimes. Sometimes I'll roll to the edge 10 times before I go, okay, and you visualize jumping the staircase. Even as a kid, you understand this is what it takes. And then when you go to jump down the staircase, you have to commit 100%. Otherwise, you're going to really hurt yourself as well. So similar in a lot of sports, to be honest, you kind of have to, dangerous sports, you have to fully commit to it and go for it. And there'll be times where I would go to certain places and I know because I'm not going to fully commit, I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
It's not worth it's not worth it. So a lot of those analogies I do pull from sports, which also have helped me in my corporate career in terms of the risk taking and having a high level of risk tolerance. From playing a lot of crazy sports like ice hockey, skateboarding, breakdancing. I think there's a trend here.
You really went for those sports. The mom in me is freaking out a little bit. I'm not gonna lie. But when it comes to social anxiety, I tell people who are fearful of, say, public speaking, that there is a level of mastery and muscle memory, and that if you are anxious about getting out there in front of an audience, that at some level developing both the physical, mental memory and the toughness of being totally present is what's going to get you through. And I think that's obviously what athletes have to do. But, when you know your speech so well and your body knows where to go on stage, a lot of the anxiety lifts away once you actually start going. You just have to get there.
Oh, I've been there. So the times I have done it, within a minute, I've forgotten. I go out there. So I did a big workshop at General Mills' head office, and I had a full-blown anxiety attack like 10 minutes before I was supposed to go out on stage, and I was on the balcony hyperventilating. My co-founder Shane was like trying to calm me down. I was sweating, and it was so silly because there was no. And then literally went out there, did my intro, and then the rest of the 4 or 5 hour workshop, I was completely fine. It's just like breaking that barrier of just that
The
mental block.
anticipatory anxiety.
Yeah, there you go. That's it's the anticipation, which is the worst part, not the actually being on stage. And that's a lot of anxiety, right? Anxiety itself is anticipating a worst case scenario or something bad happening. That's
100%.
what makes you anxious, right? It's not the actual, and you
It's
feel
future
great.
based.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. What are some one thing I know you talk about a lot, which is really exciting to talk about, is remote working. So I'd love to kind of hear what you've heard, and I know you spoke to a lot of people around this, a lot of your work as well. What are sort of the positive and negatives of remote work when it comes to anxiety?
I think, well, right. It's funny. I think a lot of us, both introverted people and anxious people, have enjoyed being remote because, like you said, you're in your sort of nook, right? You're hopefully working from home by now. You've got an environment that feels comfortable for you. It can relieve a lot of the stressors that give us anxiety when we're out in the world. And I think that that's a real positive for people who have anxiety, right? If transportation, right? A lot of people are fearful they have to take the subway to work. That's a trigger for tons of people, crowds,
Me
driving, right? Yeah, exactly.
Definitely.
Right. So you just remove it. There's a lot more time in the day and your brain is able to focus rather than giving it to anxiety. I mean, the worst thing about anxiety is it has so much free rent in your head and it really takes thinking power away from other things. And so if you can remove those stressors, it's kind of great, right? On the other hand, I think what we're finding now, especially as we move into a hybrid situation where some people are in the office and some people are still remote, is that our normal human anxieties of, does my boss think I'm committed enough? Am I speaking up enough in meetings? If I don't come into work, am I going to look like I'm not a good member of the team? Right? A lot of those dynamics are coming into play. And I think a lot of leaders are really struggling with how to make work equitable and inclusive in every way, right? In this hybrid and remote environment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. It's this you can't win either way because then people are overthinking it as well. One of the things that I found, I'm not sure if you've heard this or you can relate, is I struggled when being around the team in the office was a big distraction for my anxiety. So what I found, which I struggled with, is even though I was at home with my wife and my daughter, I found myself getting caught up in my own thoughts too much.
Yeah, ruminating.
Exactly, yeah. Whereas because I'll be in the office and I'll be with a team, I'll be having those water cooler conversations. I don't have time to even think. I'm just in execution mode and just collaboration mode. And when I was at home too long, I started just overthinking everything. Like I just constantly second guessing myself and just thinking about these things. It's tough.
I call it stuck in the stew.
Okay.
When your brain is just stewing. I'm so glad you brought that up because I think that's something that is common among a lot of us, especially because look what we're living through. We're living through terrifying times. And there is so much ambient anxiety and uncertainty. Humans don't like uncertainty. No. We like a roadmap. And I think this 18 months have proven that we don't have control. And so a lot of people who even weren't anxious before are anxious. And so, even something as simple as sitting down to work and checking Twitter and seeing the latest devastating piece of news can really set your brain onto a path that takes you away from being present in your work and can make you really sad and upset and distracted. Mm-hmm. And so that's where I think that having sort of a toolkit to stop ruminating and refocus is important if you work at home. You're absolutely right. When you're in the office and you're with other people, you can't dwell.
Yeah, that's one of the things I loved about your TED Talk. And if anyone's listening, the link's in the description already. So go check that out. Not now, after. So check that out. But could you share, you shared some really simple, practical things that people can do that I've already started doing. Could you share some of those with the listeners?
That's awesome. I think a lot of it is really, you can think of it as like fencing your day or creating guardrails around your day and working in short bursts so that you can manage your time. And I think if you're the kind of person who one tweet might throw you off, which is definitely me, shut it off, right? Like try to get in a headspace where you say, I have this one task. I've made it manageable because I'm only going to do it for 30 minutes and I want to get 4,000 words. That's a lot of words, but you know what I mean, of a report written. And this is what I'm going to do. And sort of really training your brain to focus. The other thing that's really important, I think, is being in touch with your body. Anxiety is a physical response. And so a lot of times when you're starting to stew, you can feel it in your emotions. It's a little bit of maybe sadness, but maybe your chest is tight, you're clenched, your jaw's tight, and you can sort of just literally breathe, take some space, get outside, like tell your brain to switch gears and get out of the stew. Research even shows that something like a smell can train your brain to focus. And so I have a candle that I've trained my brain. I light a candle and my brain says, okay, Morra, you're going to focus. You're going to do this one task.
That's really cool because it's kind of like just telling your brain now we're in a different zone right now. It's almost like replacing your commute with something because you switch modes right on the way home from work, but most people don't have that anymore. Exactly. It's just kind of everything blends in. So I have certain people that I spoke to that when their day ends, they play a song. Yep. So I interviewed Ford's chief talent officer recently, and he said that he starts his day with this really cool song. So it telling his brain, this is the start of my day, and he ends the day with another song. And that's his new way of like breaking up the day, which I thought was really cool because he doesn't have a commute.
It's backed up in neuroscience, right? Because he's creating pathways in his brain and the music is telling his brain, okay, you're done. It's literally creating boundaries. Yeah. I mean, I love that. Yeah. I think the thing that's really, really amazing is how plastic we are. And, if any of your listeners have been in anything like cognitive behavioral therapy or have done mindfulness, one of the things that I've learned in my journey, because I'm not a psychologist, although I want to be one day, is that we all have so much baggage, and anxiety comes from within us for many reasons. It's genetic, it's from our crummy childhoods, it's upbringing. There's so many factors, and we need to understand all that, but we also need to understand how we can take simple steps to get through the day when it's hard. And so even the Ford CHRO, that's what he's doing. He's using music as a way of saying to his brain, I'm not going to go back into the darkness or get lost or answer email when I shouldn't be at 8 p.m. I'm going to create guardrails for myself, and I'm going to do it with a song.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a cool one.
It's cool.
Because on the point of audio, one of the things that you mentioned, which I thought was really cool, was the effect that having audio calls versus video calls and how people can express themselves more through audio, which I didn't expect. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? But I think that, and this is not for everyone, some people really riff off eye contact and social dynamics, right? Even if it's not 100% great on Zoom. But if you're finding yourself really, really burnt out after back-to-back Zoom calls, and frankly, who isn't?
Yeah.
Just turn off the camera, because when you're on camera, you're a human, you're performing. If you're an empathetic person, you're probably taking in, like I'm taking you in right now. Are you bored? Am I being smart enough? Am I interesting?
Yeah, you're right. You start judging and making, go on, carry on.
And if I were on audio, it might be easier for me just to sort of listen and focus on the conversation and not get distracted with all of the social dynamics. Also, when you're on camera, you're performing. We just do. That's what we do. And that can be very, very exhausting.
It's interesting because we hear the opposite from companies, right? Make sure you have your cameras on. We want to see everyone to make sure you're engaged, you're present. Whereas in reality, kind of what you're saying is causing people to, especially if you have anxiety, to perform all the time, which is exhausting. I know me personally, after a long day of doing these podcasts or doing our summit, I am mentally like, normally the day after one of our events, I take the day off just to recharge. Like I have to, and people are like, oh, you haven't done anything physically. I know, but mentally, I just feel drained, like I've run a marathon, even though I haven't even moved for the whole day. Yeah.
I'll tell you what, forcing people to be on camera is leadership anxiety. It's leaders and systems and cultures saying, we're so nervous because we don't know what we're doing here and we can't see our people and we're freaked out. So if we can see the people, it's like FaceTime, right? It's a method of control and it's a method of making other people feel better. So if your boss is one of those people who either outright says, I want you on camera, or sort of subtly makes, like, I call it sludging, like, oh, not joining us today, or didn't wash your hair this morning. You know, you get a lot of subtle comments that are really shaming. Understand that that's actually about your boss. It's about the culture of your workplace, and it's not about you and your performance. If you perform better, not having to be on camera and perform, turn off the camera.
Yeah. Wow. I'm glad you said that.
A lot of people lie about it too. It's so funny. I talked to so many people who lie about not being able to be on camera, like their laptops have been broken.
Oh, I know for certain I've had guests or people I spoke to that have just made it up that the reason they couldn't get on camera. I've done it. We've all done it.
We've all done it.
You know, I've walked in my living room and saw that there's some washing that hasn't been put away, or, you know, or some mess, right? And I'm just make up some excuse about why I can't get on my video, which is quite sad that we all do that as well. What for managers? Let's also talk about that, because it's been tough, right? Leading remote teams is a different skill. I still struggle with it as well. And whether it be, you know, on our virtual calls, making space for everyone and not having, you know, the extroverts overpower the call. There's many things that I'm still trying to struggle with. What advice would you give managers in terms of managing their remote teams?
Well, I think it's important to know that managing remote teams is empirically more difficult, right? It just is. And it requires more communication. And that can be really hard, right? Especially if you're a new manager, you haven't had the training, or like me, you're an introvert and you don't really love to be in contact with everyone. If conflict is scary. So just understand that remote work takes a new set of skills. And I think the first thing to focus on, and this is why I kind of love this moment, even though it's awful, but I think at work we have an opportunity to set new norms, right? Re-norming work. And if you're a manager right now, you can pull your team together and have a conversation and say, guys, what are our norms? When we're on Zooms, cameras optional? Cool. How many Zooms a day do we want? If you're in a business where you always have to be on camera with your clients, for example, maybe internal meetings could be audio only. What are the hours that I want you to be responsive? You know, I think that there's, as we talk about this all the time, like we're at home now and we just answer a lot more email and Slack at hours of the day that used to be off limits, right? So those boundaries have been creeping. So reset those boundaries, right? 6 p.m., you're done. And if you're a manager, think about what you need, what makes you anxious about remote work, right? Because you're a person too, and take the opportunity to set some limits and norms that are going to work for you and your team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we definitely need to be clear around the communication piece as well, though, right? Because some of these things are just assumptions can go, you know, again, talking about Ford, one of the questions we spoke about, one of the things we brought up in our recent interview, he's a chief talent officer. He said to me, he found out the other day that he sent an email on the weekend and they have a piece of technology built in that he got an email back saying, by the way, Chris, your email created like 50 hours of work. That email that you sent on the weekend when you could have waited until Monday created this, because it can track like that person then emailed this person and this person didn't end up doing this, and that task was then created here. And he was like, wow, that I casually just sent that without thinking. It could have waited. It wasn't even that important, but it made people work through their weekend and create, I think, 50 plus hours of work, which is like, whoa, right? You don't realize the impact these things have.
Well, that's why mindfulness, even though it feels like a piece of jargon or a buzzword, is really important, because what he was doing was he was acting out unconsciously, which is what we all do, right? Mm-hmm. I love to work on Saturday mornings. My kids are busy and I'm in a good mood. I love to get email done. But if I just do that unconsciously without thinking through, I'm creating a lot of anxiety and work for other people. A lot of times when we're leaders and we're anxious, what do? We get in touch with our team. We're
We
over
project it.
communicating. We micromanage. And that's about our anxiety. If we can take a step back and be mindful and think through, everything changes.
Yeah. You also speak about the physical environment. How does our physical environment impact? Let me tell you a bad example, which I'm still need to sort out. My office is currently in my bedroom at home.
That's bad.
I know. Yeah, it's bad. It's kind of obvious that that's bad. Mainly it was in there because when my wife and I were both working from home, she had the living room and that was her office. And the only other space we had was the bedroom. But I immediately realized the impact on my mental health. Like I started becoming more anxious. I was going from bed to desk to bed to desk. And wasn't trained, the gyms were closed. I wasn't exercising and it was a vicious downward spiral to the point where I started, feeling super anxious and I was in a bad place as well. But just talk, that's my terrible example for everyone listening. Don't do that.
You know what? Look, I immediately sort of said that's bad. And like, maybe it was bad for you. It may not be bad for other people, but there's many famous leaders. I think Winston Churchill used to do half of his work from bed. It worked for him. So again, we're all different. I love to work in bed in the morning, but then I have to move to another space. So I think, again, it's understanding what you need and what's going to help you relieve your anxiety and be good for your mental health. You're an athlete. You have to move, obviously. So having a day where there's no movement is going to be a recipe for disaster. And I think that if you're the kind of person who needs to go to work and you're working at home, that's really challenging and it's really hard to maintain your boundaries. And so any way that you can create a space, and look, it doesn't have to be your own office because a lot of us can't do that. It could be a screen. It could, again, be music, lighting, a nice chair. I'm very big on ergonomics though, because I think one of the things that is very challenging is that because we do put stress in our bodies, when we have a bad work setup at home, we're clenching, we're hunching, and that can really create a lot of bad ripple effects. So I think that trying to have a chair and a good screen is important.
Yeah. Well, my wife's a key culprit of that. She was sitting on the sofa with her laptop on her lap, laying down on the sofa. And her back is really bad right now.
Yeah.
She's spending a lot of money to fix that issue.
I want companies to do that. I want companies now to think holistically. And a lot of companies are, right? They're giving ergonomic consults or sending people equipment, but this stuff matters.
Yeah, definitely. Stand-up desks, everything else like that, super important as well. On that point, because one of the things I realized for me, when I'm exercising, eating well, sleeping well, I don't feel anxious, or I still feel it, but not even nowhere near to the extent. If I'm eating well, sleeping well, and exercising, I'm in a good place as well. And one of the big challenges for me was getting out, obviously during the pandemic, and the gyms were closed, and that was my place. But also just spending time away on my own. Mm-hmm. I didn't realize how important that was to me, and I didn't do it for a year and a half. I didn't do that anymore. And more recently, I've spent time in the gym on my own and just away. I love my wife, I love my daughter, but you need time away.
You have a 3-year-old also.
Yeah, you need time just to be on your own. And you speak about that as well in some of your works.
I always speak about that. I mean, I absolutely need ideally 2 hours alone a day. I get overloaded when there are too many people around me and I have to talk too much. Like after this podcast, I'm definitely going to need a break because it's been intense, right? And so I think that, again, certainly in the US, we are not a solitary culture. We are such an extroverted, social culture. And we think that that's leadership, right? And so if you're the kind of person who needs alone time, and you manage other people or you work on a team, it can make you feel sort of bad, right? If you need alone time. But I would encourage you, especially now when you have no break from your people at home and you're no break necessarily at work, to carve it out. And if you have to tell a little white lie to get out, I'm okay with that. Seriously, take care of yourself.
Yeah, I did. I went to the gym yesterday and I hadn't done so in ages. And I just remember on the way home, walking home, feeling so, I was like, I really needed that time just for me, even if it was an hour, just of no one. Didn't want to talk to no one. No one talked to me. I just want to be alone for an hour, just in my world. And I was like, I forgot how much I missed that, because normally I'm at work all day doing the show. I go home, then I'm with my wife and daughter, and then it's just like constant. I'm always on.
Yeah.
Like I just want to just have like my idea of like people are like, oh, what have you got planned? My idea of a holiday sometimes is just having nothing planned and just being able to just do nothing. And if people don't get it, I'm like, I just want to be alone for a little bit because I'm always around there for people all the time as well. So I'm glad that you get it, because some people are like, that's strange, Chris, that you want to be alone for a few hours every day. I'm like, I need it. I need it to think and recharge.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. There's no shame. And I think for parents, we also get a lot of messages, especially those of us who've had kids going through a lot, right? Being in remote school, everyone is a little bit upset. And as a parent, sometimes it's very hard to say, oh my gosh, I need some time alone when I get home from work or when I finish work. And your kids are like all over you, and you think, oh gosh, I can't be a bad parent. I can't just go have an hour by myself, but you absolutely can. And I actually researched this. I asked a bunch of childhood development experts on this question because I wanted to make sure it was developmentally appropriate for a parent to say, you know what, sweetie, mommy just needs an hour. It is okay.
It is okay. My wife sat me down actually, because I was in going 1,000 miles an hour trying to get the company back on track, and everyone's had a crazy year, and she sat me down because, like many women, she's taken the brunt of the family duties at home during this time, and she was like, Chris, I just need a break. Like, I need to you need to look after Robin on these days. I'm like, okay. She's like, I don't think I can continue this way, and I took that for granted as well. So I'm talking about myself, but I never was thinking, oh, of course my wife needs that same break as well. So I'm trying to be better at that and just carving out time where she can just go out. Like, this weekend she was out with her friends and she just could just recharge and have fun. And even I saw it the next day after, how much energy she had, and like she's so much more excited. Like, I was like, oh wow, okay, that really helped. I can see that really helped you. Apart from she had a little bit of a hangover, but that's okay too. And but I was like, she really needed that as well. So
100%,
super important. Tell everyone about the podcast, because it's funny, right? We speak about all these things more, and they're like, oh wait a minute, but we seem to put ourselves in positions where
I know.
we're hosting podcasts, we're doing all of these things that are counterintuitive to what we're talking about.
Well, unlike you, I don't do video podcasts, so mine are audio only, which for me is just like an extra layer of being able to relax. I get super, super anxious before every podcast, and I've been podcasting for a long time. I used to actually cancel podcasts at the last minute because my anxiety was so overwhelming, and thank goodness I've done some work now, and I don't do that anymore. But when you have social anxiety, sometimes even picking up the phone, even to call a friend, can really make you anxious. And that's okay. You just need to know that and learn to deal with it. I think podcasting is really like intimate, but also gives you space if you're introverted. I was a blogger for many years, and in the golden age of blogging, like in 2004, 5, 6, there was this sense that you could write your truth and people would comment and you could have a conversation, but it was behind a screen. So it felt intimate, but also gave you a lot of space. And I feel that way about podcasting. And when I listen to my favorite podcasts, I feel like I'm with my friends, but I'm also alone. It's amazing.
Yeah, I feel exactly the same way. Everything you just said.
Yeah.
As well. And I was a massive fan of listening to podcasts before I started mine. And I felt like I was part of this conversation, even though I don't know this person or the guests. I felt like I was part of it. And I also have canceled podcasts in the past because I felt anxious. Sorry, they don't know who they were, but they'll never find out. We rescheduled them and it happened. But I've been there as well. Like, and there's times where, again, luckily I've got a great team that have been like, you can do it, Chris. I know, they've been there, and now I can speak about it. Before I had no one to talk about, I would make an excuse of why I can't do it.
Yeah.
And it's a lie. I would lie to my wife, lie to my friends, because to get out of these things, these social situations as well. But now I can say it. But I get nervous before every podcast. But now I just learn to lean into it. So it's whenever I feel those feelings now, I run towards it. And the same way that I did that with, I got into sales, like out B2B sales, where you're cold calling people, pitching them products. It's like that was the most terrifying thing ever probably for like a year, maybe, until I got to the point where I relished it. Like I loved when someone said no and I had to objection handle and overcome it and get over it. And it became like an art to me, as opposed to, because, that person's born to sell. And, I was like,
bullshit.
Yeah, exactly. The number one salesperson in our entire company was a guy called Cameron. And he was an introvert. He didn't speak to no one. He said barely 2 words the entire day. He got on the phone and he just made magic happen. Yeah. And I was like, wow, like that. I'm like, that's the opposite of what I thought this was going to be. And then I realized it's something you learn, right? It was a bit cheesy, but I had a little post-it note that said, the more you learn, the more you earn. It's like pretty cheesy, but I took that really serious. And I was like, the more I learn about psychology, and I did like a course on like micro expressions in people's faces to see if they were lying or not. Like I went really deep with it. And so now people think that I'm an extrovert, but I'm like, deep down, I'm like, a lot of those times I was terrified or suffering. You just didn't know. I was very good at hiding it.
First of all, I'm so glad you said that. Second of all, like, yes, it's a skill. And, third of all, I think that the thing about being an anxious achiever is that you feel the fear and you do it anyway.
Yes.
Because you may travel around with crippling social anxiety, but you push yourself, and it is through pushing yourself that you learn. And sometimes you do hit your edge, and sometimes it is too hard. But, there's something about just pushing through that makes you grow as a person. And I really believe that people like us develop leadership skills because we persist. Like we are resilient.
Before I let you go, where can people reach you? Where can I get hold of you? And where can I listen to the show?
Well, anyone can find me on LinkedIn. I love to talk to people on LinkedIn. So look me up there. And the show is on Harvard Business Review, hbr.org, or wherever you get your podcasts. It's called The Anxious Achiever.
Amazing. Well, you got a new fan in me as
same
well.
here.
And I'm super excited about the show as well. And I wish you all the best until we next chat. Okay.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah. Bye-bye.